Kurt, so happy to be back at PBT Extra after last week off. How are you doing? How was your weekend?
I'm good. I'm doing well. I went up to the snow for a day outside Southern California. Like there's so much snow and a little too much snow in some areas, but able to go up and my daughter went skiing and kind of spent a day in the mountains and uh, it was beautiful. So it was
Are you,
just
are you ski or snowboard?
she skis. I ski as well. I did not that day, just for some long story logistical reasons that were going on. But it was just being back up in the mountains and doing a little hiking and just being around the snow and the crisp mountain air. Like, does me good.
Yeah, it snowed yesterday. It flurried here in New York, and it's just weird. It's like days you think, okay, spring's here, and then it just flurries,
Yeah.
and it was freezing. I think it was yesterday, and I was just like, I can't do that. And today it's sunny, so I
Today-
don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going
Yeah.
on, Kurt.
What have you been? I mean, obviously you were in Brooklyn for the A10 tournament, but you've been.
Yeah, I was covering a lot of basketball recently, and so it's been a lot of fun. And I think, as far as artistically, I remember we talk about this all the time. What's inspiring me? What's inspiring me? I went to the opera and I was wrong. I remember I told you I thought that was my hot take that the opera would be brilliant. Remember this spring?
Yeah.
And I went and I went to the Met Opera. I saw Norma. I had to leave halfway through.
Wow.
It was I just couldn't do it. It was so disappointing and disheartening to me. So I'm still not particularly inspired by like, I think anything right now, which is kind of sad. It's a little sad. But the opera, I was wrong. I was wrong about the opera.
The concert I went to, I kind of forgot. We've never done this for a couple of weeks ago. Was out here the New Orleans Preservation Hall Jazz Band.
Oh yeah, you like that band a lot.
I do. So we had went out and had some Cajun food beforehand. Then went and saw the New Orleans Preservation Hall Jazz Band and had a great night. So
can't complain. So let's get into basketball since we have a lot to talk about. So let's talk about the Grizzlies. There was a time in which the Grizzlies appeared to be the best team in the West, or you could argue top two, for a long time. And then now Ja Morant taking this leave of absence, Brandon Clark and Steven Adams out for the season. Where do they fall heading into the most critical part of the season, Kurt?
Yeah, they started stumbling on the court when Steven Adams went out, right? Like they just missed the guy who does the dirty work, who sets the picks and is physical inside and provides. Brandon Clark can do some of that, but he's the guy who's the big body in the paint that's and allows Jaren Jackson Jr. to come in flying around, just boxes guys out, who just does those kind of things. And you could see how much they missed him on the court. Now losing Brandon Clark for the season with the Achilles, and now we'll see if and when Ja returns this season. But they do, with everything going on, haven't they felt like a team kind of in turmoil, a team that kind of lost its bearings?
Yeah, I mean, I think with when I think about Memphis, they were a team in which I think they were. I didn't think they were contenders at any point, but I did think they were taking leaps forward, right? I did think they were growing as a team and going through the process. Because in the NBA, there is a process. You kind of have to be bruised a little bit. You have to kind of go through each series, and you have to get beaten. That's kind of like how it works. So I thought that they were going through that process and becoming purified in that sense of like going through the furnace and coming out like purified gold. And then this came up, and this is, I think, indicative of one. I don't necessarily understand the Western Conference generally, and then two, I think with this team, it also is indicative of their youth, and I think there's an elements of like, okay, well, you don't know what to be afraid of when you're young, Kurt,
Yeah.
So I feel like at some point, like, I don't think it's going to get to them like it would maybe some older teams. I think they still might be able to do a little bit of a push, but at the same time too, like, you're not going to go very far without Morant, like, period,
Yeah. I think two things I would say too also are, I am glad that Ja is getting the help he needs, and I'm glad that the conversation kind of became, and especially around the Grizzlies themselves, it was not about punishment. It was about, hey, how do we get this guy to find the path he needs to be on? What kind of help can we provide? And he's now, he's in a counseling center in Florida. I don't know and nobody really knows if and when we'll see him this season or during the playoffs. But that's secondary, isn't it? Like what matters is him finding the path that's best for him going forward. And by the way, I still think you talking about them figuring themselves out and purifying and coming out. That doesn't just have to happen in the playoffs. I think that there's something to them as an organization and as players where when you were saying that, the phrase that came to mind was a Pat Riley phrase, which is make the most important thing the most important thing.
Yeah.
Focus on if you're going to be this basketball team, then make that the most important thing. And that seemed to get away from them. It gets away from Dillon Brooks, doesn't it? It seemed to get away from Ja. They kind of, don't you feel like this could be part of that learning process?
It's certainly part of the learning process. Like I said, I think the team itself, you look at, okay, well, who's it built around the foundations? Do you have alignment from ownership, coach, GM, all the way down? Are role players buying into the roles? You look at Dillon Brooks, clearly he has bought into his role as a role player. Like he understands what his job is, And I think from that perspective, I'll give you an example. Like Bruce Bowen for the Spurs, remember, his whole thing was like a Kobe matchup, right? Like we need someone to lock down Kobe, and he, was that guy. He was a great defensive player, and he was a knockdown 3-point shooter. And so I understand, like, okay, well, what's your role? What is PJ Tucker's role on that championship Bucks team? So I think that's hardening to see that it's encouraging, right? When you look at the Memphis Grizzlies and like, okay, well, Desmond Bane understands his role, Jaren Jackson Jr. understands his role. And Dillon Brooks understands his role. Not only understands it, there was a huge piece in ESPN where he relishes the ability to get under people's skin. Like he relishes that role of being, public enemy number one. And so I think those are all encouraging parts as far as like, well, how do you grow as a team? But I do think the youth part, as far as like trying to start rivalries or like trying to, I don't understand that part of it. And that's kind of what I mean. I think it detracts from like the professionalism of like, well, what is our goal? What's the most important thing? It's to win a championship. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I agree that with the sort of manufactured, I guess, they did play the Warriors in a playoff series, and the Warriors privately, by the time they got to the finals last year, were like, yeah, the Grizzlies were a real problem for us because of the athleticism. Just they're so much more athletic than the aging Warriors were that they had been a problem. With Dillon Brooks, by the way, I like the Bruce Bowen comparison, but I think you hit the nail on the head. And by the way, I hadn't really thought of him like a PJ Tucker, but it's sort of the same thing, right? If you're going to be the defensive stopper, you've got to be able to be good enough on offense that I can't ignore you. It was the problem Matisse Thybulle had with the 76ers last year, which is, yeah, he's a great defender. He's great. We need him on that end. If I can ignore him and play 4-on-5 on the other end, I'm going to be able to slow you down. Dillon Brooks has to get to a point where his shot is good enough, where he is enough of an offensive threat that I can't ignore him. Because right now I can. And that's a holding. Like, those are the little steps. You don't have to be, like you said, don't have to be great at anything. If you can shoot 40% on corner threes and I can't leave you, that's enough, man.
Yeah, or you have to be like the defensive player of the year, like Marcus Smart. You have to be a glue guy who's a defensive player of the year. I think Marcus Smart's another great guy to, as far as like, what is my role? Like you got Jason Tatum. Like, you're like your job is not to score. Your job is to be a glue guy in the locker room, to be our emotional leader and support, and then to be a defensive player of the year. And that's kind of, I think, like that's what I love about the Grizzlies is that I think people understand very clear. It's like Tyus Jones understands his role, and I think you have young guys who buy into that. However, I do think that I remember earlier in the season I said they're kind of like a punk band. Remember, I was like that's kind of what the Grizzlies are. And I do think, like I said, that gives them an edge because they don't know what to be afraid of. But I also think that hurts them tremendously because one of the problems with like punk bands, like you grew up like liking punk music. It's like this is a job and the season's really long, and like the whole point of the NBA is you have to be a professional, right? You have to have that edge, but you also have to be professional, and you have to be able to bring some sort of consistency to the edge for the entire season through the playoffs. You can't peak and then dip and then peak. There has to be this element of consistency and controlled punkness, and I think that's kind of where the youth is a little too far on the Grizzlies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I think they can learn a lot in these playoffs though, because I don't just look at the standings. They might slip below the Kings. The Kings are playing fantastic basketball right now. By the way, like
You're
we
right.
didn't talk about it, but still like my favorite
You
story
were
in the
right.
NBA this year.
No, yeah, you were right.
Yeah, I mean, they're just a fun team. They're not. Things are going to shake out for them. Like I suddenly am like the conference finals. Like if they get somebody they can beat in the first round, then they get the stumbling Grizzlies without Ja, and like it's a deeper run than I expected for them.
Yeah,
And that said, I don't want to. We're not going into deep into Kings talk, but the Kings are on such a high that I can and playing so well that I can see them getting the 2 seed over the Grizzlies. But the Grizzlies, where the cushion they've built up there, and especially since the Suns are the 4 seed and they're missing Kevin Durant, and they're just treading water. I don't see anybody catching them. Like they're gonna have a really good seed, and that gives them doesn't that still give them the opportunity for the kind of run they're hoping for?
Once again, I don't think they're going to go far without Ja Morant. I think he's the linchpin here. It's clear, in my mind. I understand, they've a little over 500 with him absent, but we're talking about a very small, group of games, and we're also talking the playoffs at a different level of intensity. So, you need talent to win, and they need Ja Morant. However, you're right. I mean, look at right now they're sitting at 41-26. That's their record in the second spot. Kings 40-27. Suns 37-32, Warriors 36-33, Clippers 36-33, Timberwolves 35-34, then Thunder 34-35. So like everyone, and then the Mavs are right there, the Lakers are right there. Everyone's kind of stuck in the mid 30s. So you're right.
As of this morning, as of us recording this, because I had been writing on this morning, 4 through 13 is all separated by 3 games in the West. Like it's insane how just if you have a hot week and a half.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I mean is that's why I think Memphis is in a really bad spot, because of that. Like, okay, if you tell me 2 or 3 teams are in that scenario, you have a hot week and a half, like, okay, what are the odds? But if you're telling me that the vast majority, over whatever 60-70% of the conference and like they're in that group of, if anyone, if 4 through 13 have a good week and a half, we're dropping, like that to me is concerning, because the likelihood of that happening, I think is, it's much higher than in a different scenario. So that's kind of where I'm worried about the Grizzlies, but of course, without Morant, I don't think they can really do anything in the playoffs. So that's the big thing for me.
I will add this about the West. I think what's going to make the West playoffs fascinating, Corey, is the guys, the players that scare you. Stephen Curry, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant sort of at 4, but Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, all are in the bottom. Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, all in that bottom half of the bracket. It is, you get that 2 or 3 seed, you have a potential real threat in the first round. Like it's not like the guys with the playoff experience that we keep expecting to flip the switch are going to be on the bottom half of that bracket. And they're all guys and teams who know how to win on the road. It's going to make the West hard on teams like Memphis, who going to earn this home court, but then they're going to draw somebody really good in the first round, regardless of where they land.
Also, with the whole, I want to bring this up before we move on. We're talking about how the rivalries and all that jazz with the Memphis Grizzlies. In my opinion, do you remember those Spurs teams that played against the Grizzlies? Actually, remember with Marcus Gasol and Zach Randolph and Mike Conley, and how it was like,
what the grit and grind Grizzlies.
Yeah, and there was like always, I remember being a Spurs fan, I mean, my whole life, but at that time it was so interesting because it was like, we're the number 1 seed, and this 8 seed, like it's just a matchup issue, and like at any given moment, like they could kind of like knock us off, which was really frustrating. That's kind of how I feel like that Grizzly team reminded me of this Grizzlies team. If you look at like the Warriors or whatever, like you mentioned, like there's a matchup issue here. We're like, well, what are you going to do with this? They're so young, they're so athletic, they're so long, and Ja Morant is so clutch at any given moment. You're like, okay, well, how do we kind of handle them? But I do think as constructed, they're not a contender. But like I said, Ja's like 23, so like they have time to figure it out. But it is an interesting kind of question. I think they have more talent than that team back in the day, that other Grizzlies team. But for me right now, I think the Grizzlies at this juncture basically only present issues as far as like a matchup in a series or 2, and that I think is the ceiling at the current moment, which it's difficult to say out loud, right? But in a West where 4 through 13 is separated by 3 games, Kurt, I mean, it's like that's why I think they could eke out, They can eke out, but it's not. But you won't match up against the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, no, I still think the top of the East is better. So while we're on the subject of bottom half of the of playoffs, let's go to Corey's jukebox, because the Clippers, one of those teams, is in Corey's jukebox this week.
Yeah, so I wanted to go for an LA band. I've been one of the things, because I told you the offer just wasn't doing it for me, and it isn't doing it for me. I wanted to go into underground hip hop. So I don't know if you follow underground hip hop. I don't know if you're into that, Kurt.
It's not my wheelhouse. Yeah.
There's an LA band called People Under the Stairs, and there's a song called The Breakdown. And I think it's a really interesting song, one, generally, because it's, LA underground hip hop. And like, if you're going to talk about the LA teams, the Clippers, I guess, are underground hip hop.
They are, compared to I'm trying to think of the proper musical comparison, but they'd be the diva showstoppers that are the Lakers.
Right, exactly. So, in LA basketball, I guess the Clippers are the underground. And so I wanted to kind of, do that. And then also with Kawhi, I think Kawhi is he's like the MF Doom of the NBA. Like Kawhi is the guy who's like, he's not, the most mainstream dude in the sense that, people don't talk about Kawhi every day, even though he's supremely talented. He's kind of like an underground hip hop legend in that sense. And I thought, so like with the breakdown, it's a whole song talking about like how, they rap because they have to, and they love rap, and it's not about the commercial part of it or whatever. It's just like a love letter to all the rap legends that they grew up listening to and how they're in love with the game. And I feel like the Clippers, although I have my issues with the Clippers, I do feel like they are a group of like underground rap guys. Like, Batum just loves basketball. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just feel like Paul George just loves basketball. Like, they have Westbrook, another guy who like he'll play basketball, like anywhere, anytime, like same with Kawhi Leonard, in the sense of like Kawhi is just kind of like about the game. It seems like, once again, I have my issues with them, but I have to tip my hat to them. I think they're like the underground hip hop team in the NBA.
That's actually a really interesting. I like the analogy, and keeping in LA, but I kind of like that analogy with the Clippers, and I think isn't that what makes them a dangerous playoff team? It's just a bunch of guys who like love to play and love the game and love to hoop, and like if they figure out how to get healthy and flip the switch.
Yeah, I mean, like I
said, Kawhi Leonard and Jimmy Butler are also the two guys who are like, you genuinely know there's like two more gears that they just don't even think about in the regular season that they can just shift into.
I mean, I would put Kawhi on a way different level than Jimmy Butler. I mean, Kawhi is like, like I said, when this is all said and done, I don't know where he finishes. I mean, like he's so talented. And I think there are times when we just forget that because, he doesn't play very much, or, it's just.
Yeah. But even when he plays, it's still it's almost, I don't want to say robotic is the word I'm looking for, but he's like, he's going to get the ball and he's going to get to his spot at the elbow and he's going to hit the jumper and there's nothing you can do about it. He's too strong and too good to get there. And it feels so automatic that it's not Steph from 35 feet or whatever, highlight reel thing. It's just almost methodical.
That's what I'm saying. And I think, once again, as far as underground hip hop guys are concerned, to me, Kawhi Leonard is like MF Doom. Like he's just a dude who is surgical with his rhymes. He's a guy who's going to be, a legend, like a legend's legend. Like Kawhi was doing things, and I always think about this like with LeBron. When LeBron was thinking about going to LA, remember when he wanted to win the title or become, I don't know the short list, but it was a very short list. He might be the only one on the list to win with 3 different teams, like in that scenario where I think he was like to be like 30. I forgot what age he was, but he wanted to be really young and win with 3 different teams. And I was thinking like Kawhi would and be Finals MVP, right, with each of them. And I was like, Kawhi was Finals MVP with the Spurs and won, Finals MVP with the Raptors and won. And if he goes to the LA and wins with the Clippers, and he would be Finals MVP, he would do exactly what LeBron was been trying to do, but like he's whatever 6-8 years younger. And I was like, no one's talking about this. I was like, this guy is like he's just like unbelievable. So to me, like, yeah, he's a quiet like hip hop mastermind, which is why I did the underground reference.
I like it. And then I was it the Knicks were the other one? So your hometown team now?
Oh, whoa. No, I'm a Spurs fan. But yeah, I live in New York. But yes, Julius Randle. This one I think is a little different. So I had to bring in Whiskey on a Sunday by the Dubliners. I don't know if are you interested in Irish folk
I
music?
I have listened to more Irish folk music than I care to admit. Yes.
Yes, I too love Irish folk music. There was a period in my life when I like just listened to the Dubliners for a while. Uh,
Great band.
and I so yes, for me, this is one of my favorite songs by them. I think it's like a masterpiece. I think it's a great song. And the other thing is, this song is about this guy who had a sideshow, and he would just do the same little song over and over again. And then he ended up dying, and like all the stuff, like his, the boards and the puppets he used for the sideshow ended up like going to mend the back door, and everyone forgot about him. But then he could hear the ghosts, like singing the song late, after he died. And it's just about like this guy who basically had milk every day, but then he had whiskey on a Sunday, so he was really excited, for Sundays. Just super, super the Dubliners. And to me, that's kind of like Julius Randle. Like I feel like the Knicks are good again.
Yeah, they are.
And they're good again. They're sitting in the fifth spot in the Eastern Conference. They're a playoff team, and this is a very competitive Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
That's so there. And I thought it was a flash in the pan. I didn't think they'd be able to sustain it. And I understand he had a great All-Star season, and then kind of dipped, and then now he's kind of brought it back. He's playing really well for them, and this team has matured. And Julius Randle is a guy. I remember when he was in LA. Going from where he was in LA to where he is now, like leaps and bounds better. Like every day, every year it seems like he matures. And I think with New York fans, because I don't, I think he's going to end up being like that guy who like did the sideshow, and like he's going to retire. Everyone's going to forget about him, and then they're going to remember, like the great Knicks teams, or like the moments where they're like, oh, remember we were a good playoff team, and they'll finally give Julius Randle his due. But I think right now, I think people are still sleeping on him. So that's kind of what I mean. I think, does that make sense? I wanted to kind of bring in that little.
I think that makes sense in the sense that he's part of the foundation that has turned this into a team where a star player would want to go now, which I don't think they were. In fact, I don't think they were. They were not 4 years ago, right? Like they couldn't get meetings with Kevin Durant and these guys. Now, I mean, they didn't get Kevin Durant obviously this time around, but like you'd have to think about it, because if you're a star and you think, man, I could be additive there if I go there and I'm playing with Jalen Brunson, and maybe if Julius Randle has to go out in one of, I don't, who knows who this player is. We're not gonna spend time speculating about what player goes where, but maybe he goes out, or maybe he's just the guy who helped, like you said, lay that foundation and then kind of gets forgotten about because star X comes in to New York finally and lifts them where they want to go. But he will have laid that foundation. I think that's actually a really great analogy.
Yeah, and then whenever that time does come, when they're back in the finals, or they ever do lift up a banner, if they don't mess it up, then I do think every time you talk about that, you're going to have to remember the foundation that Julius Randle laid in that team, and and his leadership. And you're, like I said, like, oh, you're going to it's going to sing again. The ghost will sing again in that sense. But but at the moment, I think he's just kind of like brushed aside, and people are kind of sleeping on him. And so I think he's not going to get the recognition that he deserves in the current moment. But if the Knicks do turn the corner, I think the ghost will sing.
Yeah, I think Brunson gets a lot of credit, and deservedly so. I don't know, don't get me wrong, but Randall's resurgence has been key this year.
Yep. So that's my jukebox. So now let's head over to Kurt's corner. What do you want to talk about, Kurt? I know you wanted to focus on USA basketball, which is always a very exciting topic, especially as we just inch closer to the World Cup this August in the Philippines.
Right. It's World Cup, and then we're a year out from 2024 in Paris and the Olympics. So Grant Hill, the new head of USA Basketball, took over for Jerry Colangelo, met with reporters this week and talked about things, and talked about how his philosophy, and not only his philosophy, but also where the program is and where basketball is got to be different than it was. When 2004, when I think, was it 2004? Well, 2004, after the loss in the Olympics, when Colangelo and Mike Krzyzewski kind of took over the program, one of the things they instituted was, hey, if you want to play in the Olympics, which is still here in the United States, that's still the thing everybody wants, right? Everybody wants the gold medal on the resume. They want to be part of the dream team. Plus, just for pure marketing reasons, the Olympics draws. If you're trying to promote your brand, your brand in your shoe, the Olympics are a better spot than the World Cup. It just is, right? So he's got one of the rules that they put in was you got to play in a World Cup. We got to have consistency. You got to play in the World Cup before you can play in the Olympics. And we're going to do. Grant Hill's not doing it that way, and he's basically came out and said that the players aren't going to do it. Today's players would not commit to both. Part of that, frankly, is FIBA's fault because FIBA moved the World Cup to 1 year before the Olympics and as an Olympic qualifier. So if you want to be one of the, I think it's only 12 or 16, 12 teams that are, you were there, 12 teams in the Olympics. Like it's not like 32 teams get to go to the World Cup in basketball, but it's only 12 in the Olympics, if I'm remembering the number right. So they're using the World Cup as a qualifier now for the games. But because they're back-to-back years in a rest and recovery world, you're not going to get Kevin Durant or LeBron James or Steph Curry or the biggest stars who are still great contributors and might want to play in an Olympics. They're not going to commit 2 straight summers to the program. They're not going to work out all through the summer 2 years in a row. So he's kind of gotten away from it. He's going to go with, hey, there's no tryouts. We're going to pick the 12 players. He's been in conversations with people. We're going to pick the 12 players, and they're going to go to a training camp in Las Vegas and play against some younger stars, and we'll go from there. And it was an interesting conversation. I mean, are you good with those kind of changes, Corey, or do you think it should be a little more traditional with tryouts and trying to develop that continuity?
No, I don't like it, but I will say I understand why. I understand why. This I think is being reflexive, to the type of players that are in the program, right? You're catering at a certain point. If you're an organization, you have to, cater to, the people that work for you or partner with you. And I understand that this is the way to go forward in that sense.
Yeah. I think the other thing that they'll be still good about, which is, or at least I hope so, is, hey, I'm going to go let's go get 5 or 6 stars. Let's put Ja Morant in there for fun and put, maybe Curry wants to go or KD's always, I don't know if he'll keep playing. KD's been great on that stage. You can go get name your superstars. You go get your superstars, but they've been really good in the past about, and I know they've had conversations with Kevin Huerter. Like, hey, Kevin Huerter's going to be great you put him in an international setting where he can just bomb threes from a shorter line. He's going to destroy people. Like the USA Basketball was smart about getting, hey, we need a guy who can defend. We need thinking through how the team would play international. We need stretch bigs. Kevin Love and Carmelo Anthony played that role for years. There's plenty of them now. You've got to go find those guys, right?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I don't know. I'm just kind of old school in this sense that, I think the recipe, the blueprint is pick the best players and let them play and make it very competitive, right? I think that's the blueprint. However, if the best players don't want to play, or and this is kind of what I mean is, I understand. Okay, maybe you give people like Keldon Johnson was on the Olympic team, and like Zach LaVine. Maybe you give them opportunities. JaVale McGee was on the Olympic team, so maybe like people, we can open up the scope a little bit and allow, like you said, Kevin Huerter to pursue that Olympic dream, which is cool. But like I said, I think ultimately, what is the blueprint? I think they're getting away from the blueprint, but largely because these players are brands. Like that was how you started off this Kurt's Corner, is if you want to amplify your brand or sell your shoe. And I think that's not what the Olympics are about. One. And then the second thing I think is this idea of, well, if you are that big, if you're that big of an enterprise, like, if you are a corporation, it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that can almost be like, how you have like the institutional lethargy, where you're like, a gallery can do an art show in whatever a couple months, but it takes a museum a few years just because it's the size of it. I think you're having that same issue with these guys where it's like you have to talk to the PR guys and the agents, then the business partners, then you have to do all, and then the sponsors, and then it's just like this whole, it's just a contingent. It's just like, well, we just want to play basketball,
Yeah.
like let's just play basketball. And so I think that is the issue that I have with getting too big. It's hard to just do the thing that got you there in the first place, but you just play basketball.
Which is, I think, why we get drawn to guys like Kevin Durant, right? Who just like
he just loves to hoop,
right? Like
he just loves to hoop. Like he's one of the guys who'll play.
If Kevin Durant just showed up at Rucker Park this summer, you'd be like, yeah, Kevin Durant to just show up at Rucker and play. Like it wouldn't be out of character.
Yeah, and that's why I think is like my issue, and this is why I think the international guys, they'll play they'll go overseas and they'll play for their national team, and they'll play all the way through the summers, and they'll come back in ready for basketball in shape, and they'll like just hit the ground running and develop. But the playing year round, getting back to like, well, what is my job? It's to be professional. It's not necessarily to be an investor. It's not necessarily I'm not getting paid to be an investor or to be an activist or to be whatever is the thing that other people are interested in. I think it's great that you have a platform to do that, but as far as strictly basketball speaking, I do think that getting too big can present a lot of obstacles and give that institutional authority. And now the USA basketball team has to figure out like, how do we combat that and not get into another scenario and be like the 1988 team, Kurt, remember, that got bronze and ended up having to then reboot everything and then pick the guys and do the dream team. Like that was not because, we should get Michael Jordan to go play basketball. It was, we had to do that, right? Like we got embarrassed on a world stage as a country. Remember, this men's team, they've won, like you look at how many teams have won since that 1988, like it's like Argentina, right? Like it's like the only one.
It's Argentina. The Manu Ginobili team was the
only one. Right. So that's what I'm saying is like, if we get into a scenario where like, the team slips because everyone wants to be a brand, and then it's going to go back to, we have to create a new dream team, I think that'd be an issue.
And the margin is much smaller, even than it certainly when it was in 1988. I mean, France is good. Spain, it took a lot for the U.S. to beat peak Spain a couple years in a row, right? Like when they had both Gasols and Fernandez and Ricky Rubio was like all the guys they were just deep with good players. France is that way now. You've got Luka in Slovenia. There's a bunch of Serbia's really good with Jokic. Like there's just really good international teams. And if the U.S. can't roll out the JV team and win the gold anymore, like you better bring it. And I'm curious. Yeah, I think this is part of that adjustment. I think this is Grant Hill saying, this is what I've got to do to get guys.
So, like I said, we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. I'm keeping a very close eye on it, Kurt.
Well, you and I both, we work at NBC. We'll be watching a lot of it, but then watching this at the World Cup. But we should talk about where the passion is for the next couple of weeks. The NCAA tournament's coming up, man.
March Madness. I know it's here. Do you have did you fill out your bracket? What do you think?
I have not filled out a full bracket yet. I kind of got to get to that today, I guess. But I'm wearing the UC. UC Santa Barbara gear today for the people watching on NBC Sports or YouTube and not on not listening to this podcast. I am wearing my quarter zip. As a suburban dad, I'm required by law to have a lot of quarter zips. UCSB jacket for my daughter who goes there, but we've been rooting for them all season because of them, and because I live near Long Beach State. I watch like Big West basketball is kind of weirdly my escape. It is if I just want to go watch a game and have a beer and not have to think about writing out of it or talking to the coach afterward or everything that comes with the job of writing about the NBA that I love, but it is a job at times. If I just want to have a beer and watch a game, I can go over to Long Beach State. And so I watched a fair amount of Big West this year, and this was the best team. Santa Barbara was the best team. It's not just that my daughter goes there and I'm kind of invested. They move the ball, they shoot, and Baylor is a bad defensive team. And so that's a Friday game. I think I want to say 1:30 Eastern. It might be 2:30, 1:30 or 2:30 Eastern. This could be one of those matchups where Baylor is in for a little bit of a surprise because this team moves the ball, shoots the ball, brought back almost all their starters, has a guy who's going to play internationally, and can get into the paint. Santa Barbara is going to be a problem for Baylor. So anyway, I'm all in on Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of interesting upsets on the men's side. I think the men's side have been just so like it's been hard to follow. I think the only two consistent teams have been like Houston, who now Marcus Sasser's injured, right, and then Purdue. And so like for me, like those are like the only two that have been really consistent all year long at the top. And then everyone else, like Alabama, I think is surging. I think they'll make it to the Final Four. I think Kansas will make it to the Final Four. I think they'll probably repeat, and that's my personal opinion. But like all the other top teams, like I've seen enough teams this year be in the top 10 or 15, then drop out and then somehow get back into the top 10. It's kind of been crazy, Kurt. So I do think there's gonna be a lot of really great upsets. I think there's gonna be a lot of madness this year. But my Final Four, I think Duke is actually going to
Duke's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Duke is going to upset Purdue because they're in the same quadrant. I think Duke's going to get
not as much as I know everybody's high on them. They're going to have the collegiate player of the year. I think Purdue's beatable.
That's what I'm saying, and that's what I mean is that like it's kind of confusing a little bit men's basketball this year, where I'm like I don't know, like the two most consistent teams. I think Houston's very beatable right now. Obviously,
that's by the way the betting favorite for people watching at home.
Yeah, I mean I think because Houston's in the same bracket as Texas and Texas A&M. And I think Texas is playing really well. Like, so I think a Texas team will get out of there, and I think it's going to be University of Texas. And like I said, I think Purdue is going to get upset by Duke, which is like peaking at the right moment, man. For me, the women's side is not nearly as variable. For me, it's like who's coming second to South Carolina.
Yeah, exactly. They are such a wooden-esque type of juggernaut where you're like, you're looking for who can upset them. But hey, you're Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the same quadrant as Stanford, and Stanford. I mean, I think they've won 2 championships in the last 3 years.
Yeah,
so you gotta. I mean, but they did get upset by UCLA in the conference tournament. So like, I do think Stanford is a little weak right now. I think Iowa is playing out of their mind. Caitlin Clark, I think she had. I mean, her conference tournament was crazy, and I think that team. You're talking about returning stars from UCSB. Like that team is deep. They're all vets. And they've been through that kind of the ringer. I think that they could upset Stanford and end up going to the Final Four, but they're going to have to play against South Carolina, and that's tough. And then on the other side, Virginia Tech, 11-game win streak. They look really great. Indiana is number 1 seed. So like I think there's some teams that are interesting, but no one, in my opinion, can beat South Carolina. I think UConn is going to get to the Final Four, despite all the injuries. I do think they'll do the same thing they did last year and somehow get to the championship game.
Yeah, I'm with you. Ultimately, I think the team that beats South Carolina is South Carolina. If they're playing well, I don't know who touches them.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the bracketology by Kurt and Corey. So we'll see if we're right.
Go for it. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see if we're right. I mean, but anyways, Kurt, always a pleasure to talk basketball with you. If you want to know what Kurt and his team are up to, why don't you just go over to NBCsports.com/NBA. It'll all be there for you. Kurt, looking forward to next week.
Looking forward to it.